Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Sitting here with Greg. Greg, I wanted to ask you, you knew Frank Campione, and seems to be some controversy about how he was associated with Sonny. Could you tell me a little bit of his background and how you knew him?
Well, Frank grew up in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, the same area as Sonny. He was a sheet metal worker in Local 28 for a good 20 years. He had met Sonny at the Herrick's Community Center. He was playing stickball with John and Michael, and they kind of hit it off. And that's how everything began with him and Sonny.
Was Frank a member of organized crime?
Yeah, he was made in 1988 in the Colombo crime family. He started off, being basically, from what I know and what I heard, Frank Campione was put like in Michael Franzese's crew. And from there, then later on, 88, he was made. He lived right around the corner from Sonny also, which is, I want to tell everybody, he lived right around the corner. He could have walked from Sonny's house to his house. And he lived about maybe 5 blocks from where I live.
So his close proximity to you guys, did that help kind of facilitate a relationship with his son Michael? Because I know Michael knew John Jr. very well.
He was young. He was a lot younger than me at that time. I didn't know his son. Another thing I want to say while you're talking about the son, I really never heard anything bad about him. He was a lot younger than me at the time, and what have you. At one time, the newspapers wrote a report that he had wrote Frank's judge and said, don't let my father out of jail. And in the end, Frank forgave him and believed that it was a lie. And what a friend of Frank told me was, and I believe him, was that the reason why that he believed his son was the handwriting was not his. And this person seemed to think that John Franzese might have sent a letter and signed his name. I wouldn't put nothing by John Franzese.
About what time did Mike Campione start
Oh,
working
Mike.
with Sonny?
Well, he wasn't really a criminal or whatever, but Sonny always needed somebody to drive him around or whatever, and he was a person you can count on. He never say no if you need to borrow a few dollars or you need a ride. He was the type of person that would do it. So that was that was later on after Frank died. I would say in the 2000s somewhere, maybe early 2000s.
But really, Mike Campione probably spent most of his time with John Jr. Did he get involved in any of John's drug use or any of John's antics?
He was friends with John Franzese at one time. I wasn't around. I was probably in jail. And yes, John introduced him to drugs, which was not good. But he's as far as I know, he's cleaned up his act and what have you. He's doing okay. Whenever you get involved with the Franzese family, and I'm saying everybody, and I'm being truthful, everybody, it's like taking a seat on the Titanic. You're going to sink. His father, Frank Campione, he was basically he started off as a bodyguard and chauffeur for Sonny Franzese. And then down the line, he became a bodyguard and enforcer. He became a babysitter. He tried to be so loyal to Sonny. You could not ask for a better person than him. John would get high on drugs and be gone, and his mother would be worried about him. And the first one they called was Frank Campione. John had some older brothers, but for whatever reason, Carmine and Michael, they just never got involved. So it was always Frank Campione. Everything was on his shoulder. So he would drive to Greenpoint, Brooklyn, or excuse me, Williamsburg, and find John. He always seemed to know where to find him. I went with him one time, and John was in such a comatose state. And he told the Dominican guy, there was all Dominicans there. He told him, get me the pickle juice. And the guy comes over there, went into the bodega or wherever he went, and came out with this like a jar of pickle juice, and he threw it in John's face and put some in his mouth, and it was a good remedy to get him out of that comatose state. Then there were times that John, his mother would buy him a car, and then he would sell the car to these Spanish people for $100, $200, a new Jaguar, a truck, what have you. It was always Frank that had to go get the car back. And the Dominicans, they had a lot of respect for Frank Campione. And I have to say this about them, because I got to know them through Frank and then being in prison. They were the Dominicans in the 90s, 2000, probably even now, they were like the older Italians. They're very quiet, very respectful. If you back them into a corner, they could be, very rough. They have no fear. So Frank, he was always being like a father figure to the Francese's kids. Like I said, Michael was not around. He went to, I guess, California. He got involved with his new family, and the Franzese family was sinking. And the bad part about it is when someone's drowning and you reach out a hand to save them, you get drowned yourself. That happened with my brother, and it happened with Frank Campione because, first of all, in the 80s, maybe 84 or something like that. Frank Campione had a porter working for him or a janitor. His name was Orange Tut, and somehow him or his wife they leaked some information to mess up, and they messed up a grand jury indictment that would have got Michael Franzese. And then years later, a year or two later, when Michael Franzese got arrested, he ratted out John Vanasco, who was like partners on his auto dealership. He ratted out Johnny Vanasco. He ratted out Frank Campione. And they, to avoid a 10-year prison sentence and Michael taking in the stand, they got 4 years. Frank Campione got 4 years. And then he comes out of jail and he's on parole and he trusts John and everything else or whatever, and he gets burned again. He meets with known criminals, and the FBI just seems to come by there and take pictures of him with these people. They send it to his parole officer. The parole officer locks him up. In the real world, the good rule of thumb is, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Once they did that and got rid of Frank, that was the end of the Franzese family. Nobody was giving him money. Nobody was bringing them money like Frank Campione did. They got so far behind in bills. They lost the house. The mother was living in her car. She was living in a dumpy basement apartment in her sister-in-law's house. And it was just a horror story.
What would Mike Campione say to the people that still deny that Michael Franzese didn't rat out on any MAID members, especially Frank Campione? What do you think Mike Campione would say to that?
Well, he wouldn't agree, but I'll say this about the Campiones. Even Frank, when I told him a long time ago, like I went to jail in 1990, end of 1990, and about 2 months later, Frank Campione had begun his 4-year sentence for the information that Michael Franzese gave to the FBI about him. And this isn't made up or nothing. We had the FBI agent on one of the, I forget his name, who was in Goodfellas, say this, that he gave information that led to the conviction of Frank Campione. But Frank would never badmouth John. He'd never badmouth Michael. He always had like a poker face on, and he just never he had a lot of respect for Sonny, like other people, so they don't really speak out about these two.
So in the end, would you say that Frank Campione was betrayed by both Michael Franzese and John?
He was betrayed by both of them, yes. And it was such a shame because he was even good to Gia. Gia was basically the one who introduced me to her, saying Uncle Frank. I didn't know at the time. I thought maybe he was an uncle or whatever. Then I got the gist or what have you. And he would take us out to Vincent's Clam Bar in Carl Place, and we'd get like a double order of fried shrimp and calamari over linguine, whatever we wanted. And Frank would always pay. If I tried to take out money, he would make a face. If the brothers that were there, the owners, Bobby and Tony, they wouldn't charge Frank. But a lot Frank never looked for nothing but free anyway. He'd rather just pay. He never let me go in my pocket. He never let Gia go in her pocket. And then when I had gotten arrested and I was having a hard time with the lawyer and everything, Gia says, talk to Frank, talk to Frank. And she called him up. He came over and I told him, and he offered me his lawyer. And I said, Frank, the thing is, I just spent a lot of money on this first lawyer. And he said, don't worry about it. The guy will do it. When you get the money, you pay him, whatever. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to ask favors. I didn't think they really put me in jail for something so stupid, a quartergram and a cushion of a couch. but he did try to help me. He tried to help everybody. He was a good guy. He was very well respected. Matter of fact, my mother's cousin, he met with my mother's cousin one time who was, I guess he was in the Gambino crime family. He had a club on Utrecht Avenue. I never really asked him too many questions. I only seen him at weddings and funerals and got to know him. And Frank went to talk to him about, having my family, tell the truth to get me off parole. I kept getting violated and what have you. And my mother's cousin said, this family is effing ubats, meaning crazy. My mother, my brother, aunts, what have you. But later on, another time I seen him, and he said he had nothing but respect for Frank, and he said, "What a good guy." He said, "It's a shame he got involved in that Shungad crew." And he was really well liked. Nobody could ever say anything bad about him.
So I know you've spoken to John Jr. at least twice so far, and that was through Michael Campione. Are they still in contact? How's their relationship?
Well, John Franzese is an opportunist, an ass kisser, a user. I don't know exactly what they talk about or whatever, but I'm sure John is begging for money and stuff like that, and maybe the kid sends $100 or $200 to him, whatever, which is a mistake. You can't keep playing that victim card. It doesn't work out in the real world. I had a stepfather. He was gone by the time I was 15, and because of my mother. So I grew up without a father. A lot of people grew up without a father. There's other people that had fathers that were in jail and went on to make something out of their life or whatever. You can't point the finger that, oh, it's my father's fault. It's this person's fault. John Franzese had a lot of help. He had a good grandfather. His grandfather used to take me and him fishing, or he took us places. He took us fishing. He took us to fish markets and bought fish that he cooked up. He was generous to the mother, which was his daughter. He had, Frank Campione. He had a lot of other friends. And there was Phil Caruso, who was friends with, all of them. And he was on the first episode of I Married a Mobster. He was a money maker. He was into, let me see, he was into the phone card business at one time. He made a lot of money with that. He got convicted of drugs. John set him up for that. He got a life sentence, like for life. He was very good to the Franzese family too, and he was another one who ended up in jail for being nice to them. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, really like shame any of them. John wanted. I just tell the truth here. I'm not somebody, making up stories for views or what have you. I'm telling an accurate portrait of some of these people. And
Yeah.
also you see some of the pictures that we have of Frank with his wife, and they were a good couple. They were went out a lot. They had a lot of fun. They really didn't argue that much in the beginning. Maybe when Frank went to jail or what have you, and she was a very nice woman too. But Frank, like I said, he was a second father and a babysitter to the Franzese kids because everybody else, left Dodge, and it was not good. It really was not good. They should have appreciated him more. And my brother is like from the same mold as John Franzese. I fought his fights. I bought him bicycles as a kid, and nobody gave me money as a kid. Nobody was handing me $5 or $10, but I did it for my brother, and he ended up testifying against me. He didn't go to the police voluntarily. He went to them in handcuffs and just point a finger at anybody, just not to go to jail. And it's really, really terrible because these were really, really good friendships and people that reached out to them.
Yeah. How does Mike Campione feel about what happened to you? How familiar is he with your case? I'm sure he's very familiar.
A lot of people that got to know my mother. He didn't know my mother, but my mother's a certified nut job, and she part of the reason my brother grew up the way he did. But my brother, people are really like a lot of people. Half of people in the neighborhood were shocked. The other people were like, what happened here? And then as time went on, and my brother, started attacking women with beer bottles and stuff like that. And then he starts posting all this, negative stuff about politics every minute. His hobby is complaining about Donald Trump.
I understand. Did you mention that Frank Campione, he was involved in a legitimate business? It was a There
Well,
was an
John Vanasco had this. I met John Vanasco once or twice. I don't really remember much of him. I don't even know where he is today, if he's alive, in jail, what have you. I think he went with another crew, from what I heard later on. But he was associated with the Colombo family. He was a good friend of Frank's. They were partners. Or Johnny Vanasco had this automotive dealership, and Frank had something to do with it. Like I said, Orange Tut was a porter there. So he was involved in some legal things. He was involved mostly in gambling. I remember one time Gia took me to a place called the Monte Excelsior, and it was a building where a lot of unsavory characters, drug dealers, mob related guys lived in Queens, right off of the Grand Central Parkway. And they had a illegal Las Vegas night there. They made a lot of money, and they had a lot of security. They had dogs. They had buttons, under tables. If somebody tried to rob the place, like six guys would run out with shotguns. And then another time, she wanted to see Frank, and she took me to Queens, and it was a Jack Lane and something else in the shopping area. And we went to the back of it and walked down a few steps, and she knocked on the door, and this like door had I guess a piece of wood over it or whatever, and it opened up, and the guy said, "Who is it?" And she said, "It's G. I'm here to see Frank." And he let us in there, and I went. It was an illegal horse parlor, and they had also had like these Joker 5-in-1 Joker poker machines with blackjack and different stuff on there. So he was into gambling. He uh, he had good ties with people, Dominicans in Brooklyn. He also had good ties with bikers. Say they wanted to extort a business. Frank might say to them, go into this. He might tell the bikers, you go into this business and don't start any trouble, don't curse, don't do anything. Just park your bikes out front and just sit in there and just buy a soda. And then after a while, customers weren't coming in there, and then I guess the owner would pay up. So that was kind of like, Frank, he was definitely muscle. He was definitely muscle. He was Michael Franzese's muscle. To be honest with you, if somebody owed Michael money, even back then, they probably wouldn't have paid him, but you send Frank Campione, but he's getting the money or you're falling off a roof.
one quick question I had. I know Gia had said to you to stay close to her dad, but
Yes.
before she passed away, did she have any concerns about her brothers, about the people that were close to them? Did she ever tell you to stay away from them or mention how they were leading other people down the wrong path?
Sometimes she was very protective over her brothers, and other times she had her doubts. She was really scared out of her mind. I think I said in one video that she was running in and out of the police station saying her life was in danger, and the family just told the police station that she had irreversible damage from drugs. She was a nut job and this and that. She was no nut job.
What happened with Frank after he got out of prison? You said he did 4 years. And what was his life like afterwards?
I didn't see Frank for strangely enough, some of the really good friendships I've had were short, and they basically ended because of jail sentences and stuff like that, or deaths or what have you. So I knew Frank, from the I'd say 86 to 90, and then I went away, he went away, and I think we came out around the same time. Well, he probably came out a little before me, and I seen him in the parole office in Hempstead, and his hair had turned all gray. I remember his hair was really black, and it turned white. I felt bad for him. He got violated on parole a couple of times. We all got violated on parole. It was nothing personal. There were Jewish people that ran the parole department, from the supervisors to the parole officers, and they did not like Italians. They didn't like Italians. They just would violate everybody for everything. And the way they treated me and Frank and some other people, if they treated animals the way they treated us, there'd be a lot of protesters. First of all, we all got our driver's license taken away. We were given a 6 o'clock curfew. We were not allowed to work a lot of different places where we wanted to work, even if it was on the books, even if it was legit, they would tell you no. They demanded money from you every month for parole supervision fees, and you could do all the right things, and at the end of the day, they violate you and put you in jail.
How did Frank's prison sentence and parole violations affect his family. We're very
Uh,
familiar, very familiar with how
well,
Sonny's family.
people have a lot of myths about the mob and what have you, and they don't always help you. I know that a few guys that I've known through my life that I've ran into, not really, was associated with or whatever, but people that I knew pretty good, like a Patsy Conti. When Joey Armone died, who was the underboss of the Gambino crime family, when Sammy went away and I think John went away, when he died, every single week, Patsy Conti had an envelope. I don't know how much it was. He had an envelope for Josephine Armone. He had people deliver groceries, like the best meats, the best food, Italian food, what have you. Patsy Conti, he owned, I think, 17 Key Foods, a bunch of meat markets. He was the vice president of Key Food at one time. He was a loyal person to his boss. But even though Frank was really loyal, he didn't get the loyalty back. When he went to jail and stuff like that, Michael Franzese didn't send him money in jail. Didn't try to help his wife. John Franzese, he could squeeze the eagle off a quarter. He didn't help. Nobody helped them, man. So the family struggled. They had some bad years. Like I said in another interview, that Mike Campione had sold his father's car. They needed the money, so they sold his father's caddy, and the mother used the money for bills. It's not cheap to live on Long Island.
No, and it still isn't.
And I'm sure, and I'm sure his wife reminded him, like, well, where's all your friends now, Frank? Like that type of thing. And it wasn't good. A lot of people helped the Franzese family. John could say in videos, yeah, kids were told not to talk to him and stuff like that. Yeah, they were told not to talk to him after he started acting like a moron. Getting high, putting people in jail, stuff like that. After a while, people don't want to associate with you. The last thing I want to say is, I didn't see him in the end. Frank Campione died in 2012. He was just about 70 years old. I think he just turned 70. He had a heart attack. He was in a nursing home, and I'm sure he died a lonely life. It's a shame. I wish I was there, but I wasn't. I had my own problems. I was going in and out of shelters, going in and out of parole violations and stuff like that. All right, thanks, Nick.
You got it. All right, I'll talk to you soon.